The pitch room was cold, all glass and steel, with a long table reflecting harsh fluorescent lights. David Carter, a 32-year-old black tech entrepreneur, stood at the far end, his hands slightly trembling as he clasped his prototype. He'd rehearsed this moment for months, pitching his AI-driven logistics platform that had already outperformed major players in beta. But across from him sat Vincent Hale, a white billionaire investor in his early 60s, sharp suit, sharper tongue, and a smug smirk. Vincent leaned back, glanced at David, then at his assistant, and laughed. "I expected something impressive," Vincent said, "not some side hustle dressed up in jargon." David blinked, stunned, then replied, "With all due respect, this side hustle has slashed delivery costs by 43% in test markets." Vincent scoffed, waved dismissively, and muttered, "Everyone has numbers. You people always come in with stats and no strategy." David's jaw clenched, but he didn't flinch. He turned to his slides, but Vincent stood up. "I've seen enough. You're not investable." Silence fell. The assistant shifted awkwardly. David stood frozen as Vincent buttoned his coat and said, "Let me give you some advice. Not every idea needs a stage." With that, he walked out, leaving David in a room echoing with rejection and rage. David walked out of the building in silence. The air outside felt colder than when he arrived. Skyscrapers loomed above like silent judges. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no new emails. The world hadn't noticed him, or his fall. In the reflection of the glass tower he just exited, David saw more than his own image. He saw the shadow of every rejection he had endured. He mumbled to himself, "I gave them my best," then shoved the prototype back into his backpack. A homeless man nearby asked for change, and David handed him the last $5 in his wallet. "You need this more than me," David whispered. Across the street, traffic roared and horns screamed, but he didn't move. He stared blankly ahead, his thoughts stuck between anger and sorrow. "One day," he said aloud, "they'll regret slamming that door." He zipped up his jacket, pulled his hood over his head, and walked straight into the crowd, disappearing into the city's cold pulse. David sat on a subway bench, surrounded by strangers lost in their own lives. The roar of trains echoed through the tunnel, but all he heard was Vincent's voice repeating, "You're not investable." He pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with sketches, numbers and ideas scribbled in fading ink. It was his dream, compressed into 120 pages. He flipped to the last page and stared at the word legacy, underlined twice. He closed it slowly and pressed it to his chest. "They don't get to define my worth," he whispered. A child across from him stared curiously, and David offered a small smile. The train arrived, doors whooshing open. He stepped in, took a seat by the window, and stared out as darkness swallowed the station. For every man who slammed the door, David vowed to build a building of his own. The rumble of the train shook the air, but in his heart, resolve settled deeper than ever before. At home, David's apartment was modest. Wooden floors, minimal furniture, walls covered in sticky notes and diagrams. He stood in front of a whiteboard filled with equations and wireframes. The rejection still stung, but the mission hadn't changed. He erased one section marked investor targets and replaced it with bootstrap timeline. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing code, eyes burning with purpose. In the corner sat a photo of his mother, who'd passed away 3 years ago. "I'm not quitting, Ma," he whispered. The room was quiet, except for the soft tapping of keys. As night fell, the city lights outside blinked to life. While others rested, David built. What he lacked in funding, he made up for in resilience. His journey had been laughed out of a boardroom, but the blueprint still breathed in him. By midnight, David was still working, caffeine replacing sleep. He watched lines of code compile, fingers hovering over the keyboard like a pianist before a crescendo. Then, a glitch. The code failed. He leaned back, eyes closed, breath shaking. The weight of rejection, pressure, and exhaustion bore down. But then, A quiet smile formed. "Perfect," he whispered, staring at the error. "Now I know where to fix it." He started typing again, faster, sharper. In that failure he saw a path. He didn't need their money. He needed momentum. The world had underestimated him. Now he would turn that doubt into fuel. Behind him, the skyline shimmered. Somewhere out there Vincent slept, sure he'd dismissed another dreamer. But David wasn't dreaming anymore. He was building a revolution. Brick by digital brick. David Carter didn't grow up with wealth or connections. His earliest memories were of his mother working double shifts as a nurse, her hands always tired, but her spirit unbreakable. At just 11, he learned to code on a second-hand laptop she found at a thrift store. She told him, "Baby, if they won't open the door, build your own." Those words etched themselves into his bones. In high school, while others played ball or chased clout, David stayed up late debugging scripts, running forums, and selling small tools online. His room was wallpapered in ambition, every inch marked with dreams. At 17, he got into MIT but declined, choosing instead to care for his mother when she fell ill. He took night classes, worked days, and built systems on the side. She passed before she could see his first app go viral, but her voice never left him. It echoed in every failure and every breakthrough. David didn't just want to succeed, he had to. This wasn't just business. This was bloodline. It was legacy and code. By his early 20s, David had already launched 3 failed startups, each one smarter than the last. Friends disappeared, and family urged him to get a real job. But he refused. His grind wasn't glamorous, it was brutal. He'd sleep on couches, code in cafes, eat once a day. Still, every line of code felt like a brick in the empire he envisioned. He once spent 3 nights in a laundromat using their Wi-Fi because his own was cut off. People called it delusion. He called it hunger. While others scrolled and posted, he studied product design and business models. He watched pitch meetings on mute just to read investor body language. He was building himself into a weapon, one line of logic, one failure at a time. His pain became process. His doubt became data. This wasn't a phase. This was purpose, forged in solitude and tested in silence. David's closest friends couldn't understand his obsession. "It's just tech, bro," one said. But to David, it was survival. He remembered being 10, watching his mom cry over a rejected loan. He remembered eviction notices, the sound of coins being counted for gas. Every memory sharpened his edge. When he met Jordan, a graphic designer with fire in her eyes and hustle in her soul, something shifted. She didn't laugh at his late nights, she joined him. She became his co-builder, sharpening while he built back-end. "You're not alone in this," she said, one night at 2 a.m., as they shared stale pizza. That night, their wireframes looked like blueprints for escape. Together, they weren't just dreaming. They were designing their way out. The bond between them was forged not in romance, but resilience. She saw his vision, and more importantly, she respected it. There came a moment when the app they were building, a predictive logistics tool for small businesses, actually worked. A beta client in Detroit shaved 38% off delivery times in 2 weeks. They cried when they saw the data. "It's real," David whispered. But celebration was short-lived. Funding was bone dry, and servers were crashing. A major investor scheduled a call, then ghosted. Still, they kept moving. Jordan took on freelance gigs to pay for cloud services. David sold his watch, his father's, to afford an API integration. Every setback was a toll they paid without flinching. Success didn't arrive with applause. It crept in quietly, disguised as small wins. A client renewal here. A local article there. Then came an email from a regional accelerator. "You're selected." David read it twice, stunned. "We just got in," he said. Jordan burst into tears. For the first time, they had a shot at breathing room. The accelerator opened doors David never imagined. For once, he was surrounded by mentors who listened, not doubted. He pitched to rooms that didn't laugh. His company got $25,000 in non-dilutive seed funding. Not much, but enough to breathe. He and Jordan moved operations into a co-working space. They hired their first intern, Aisha, a college student who believed in their mission. David walked in every day like it was his last chance to win. He still worked late, but now he smiled more. One mentor said, "You've got founder energy, just don't lose it." But David knew he wasn't just a founder. He was a man chasing justice in code. The seed was planted. Now he was building roots. And deep inside he still remembered the man who told him he wasn't investable. Every line of code now whispered back, "Watch me." Growth came fast, and with it chaos. David's startup, now named Pulsarot, was gaining traction with small businesses nationwide. Orders rolled in, clients demanded features, and media started noticing. But with every win, cracks formed. Infrastructure lagged. Code broke. Jordan burned out. David barely slept. A server crash one night caused major client losses. "We can't keep scaling like this," Jordan snapped, dark circles under her eyes. David rubbed his temples. "I know, I just don't want to slow down." He had hired 2 new engineers, but onboarding was clumsy. Investors still passed, often with the same coded language. "We love your passion, but the market feels crowded." Translation: "We don't believe in you." The company was growing faster than their ability to manage it. Momentum was both blessing and burden. David faced a hard truth. To move forward, he needed not just vision, but leadership. And leadership meant letting go of control, something he'd never done before. David met with a startup advisor, an ex-CTO named Marla, who listened quietly as he vented. "You're not scaling a product," she said. "You're scaling a company. There's a difference." David frowned. "I didn't sign up to be a manager." Marla nodded. "Then you'll lose everything you built." The words hit him hard. That night, he sat in silence staring at the whiteboard, filled with crossed-out roadmaps and disconnected arrows. He realized he needed to restructure, define roles, and stop wearing every hat. Jordan stepped in, suggesting they build a small leadership team. David agreed, reluctantly. Delegating felt like failure. But it was survival. They redefined processes. David focused on vision. Jordan took operations. Their team breathed easier. Growth steadied. Wow. He hadn't lost control, he'd gained clarity. For the first time, Pulsarot felt less like a hustle, and more like a company. Just when Pulsarot began stabilizing, a blow landed. A larger competitor launched a copycat feature, sleeker, better funded, and backed by major VC money. Within a week, 3 clients canceled. Panic hit the team like a wave. "They're gonna eat us alive," one engineer muttered. David stared at the screen. The rival product looked eerily familiar. Too familiar. Jordan whispered, "They took our roadmap, someone leaked it." Paranoia set in. Trust fractured. But David didn't spiral. He stood before his team and said, "Let them come. We're not chasing them. We're chasing impact." That night, they worked double shifts, rebuilt their UI, and launched an entirely new predictive feature in 5 days. It wasn't just innovation. It was defiance. Their client base dipped but didn't vanish. In fact, a few returned. One wrote, "You pivoted faster than anyone else. That's why we're back." David realized competition wasn't the enemy. Stagnation was. As the storm passed, an unexpected email arrived. A Fortune 500 logistics firm wanted a pilot using Pulsarot's tech. "This is it?" Jordan whispered, her voice trembling. David couldn't believe it. They demoed their new system, held their breath, and got the green light. For the first time, they were entering the big leagues. But it meant meeting enterprise-level standards. No more broken apis or last-minute patches. David stared at the contract, heart racing. They were no longer underdogs. They were players. He stood before his team, holding up the signed deal. Cheers erupted. Jordan hugged him tight. "We earned this," she said. And they had. Every sleepless night. Every crash. Every rejection. It all led here. David realized this wasn't the finish line. It was the starting block. The real race was just beginning. But success bred exposure. Media began picking up their story. From rejected to revolution, read one headline. Another, black-led tech startup disrupts supply chain giants. David saw his name trending. Suddenly, people who ignored him were reaching out. And then, Vincent Hale's firm emailed, "We'd love to schedule a meeting to discuss partnership opportunities." David stared at the screen, heartbeat steady. "He doesn't even remember," David said to Jordan. She looked over his shoulder and grinned. "Let's take the call." David nodded slowly. Not for the money. Not for revenge. For the narrative. This time he held the power. Tables had turned, and he was ready to write the next chapter himself. The day of the investor meeting arrived. It was the same firm. The same office. The same boardroom. But everything had changed. David entered, flanked by Jordan and his new CFO, a confident 40-year-old black woman named Renee. His stride was calm, eyes locked forward. Gone was the hopeful kid holding a prototype. Now, he was a CEO, one with revenue, clients, press, and leverage. Vincent Hale entered late, as if nothing had happened. He extended a hand and said, "David, glad you could join us." David shook it, barely smiling. "Pleasure," he replied, voice cool. Vincent gestured toward the head of the table. David didn't sit. He opened his laptop and said, "I'll stand." "This won't take long." The power shift was unmistakable. This wasn't a pitch. It was a negotiation. For the first time, Vincent looked uneasy. David didn't just remember the past. He carried it, wore it like armor. And now he was here, not to beg, but to choose. David presented Pulsar-Out's year-over-year growth, client portfolio, and upcoming product roadmap with clinical precision. Vincent listened silently, his usual arrogance dull. "What are you seeking in this partnership?" Vincent asked. David glanced at Jordan and Renee, then replied, "We're not seeking, we're filtering." Silence. David continued, "We've had 6 term sheets. We didn't come for capital. We came to see if your firm had finally learned how to spot brilliance before it blooms." Vincent shifted in his seat, his smile fading. "There's no need to be adversarial," he said. David leaned forward. "There is. Because you didn't just doubt the product, you doubted the person. It wasn't a confrontation. It was accountability." Vincent looked away. For the first time, David saw it, regret. It didn't taste like revenge. It felt like justice served at room temperature, measured, calm, and overdue. The meeting ended without a deal, but not without impact. As they exited, Vincent called out, "You've built something remarkable, David." David paused. "I know." He didn't need validation anymore. Outside, the city buzzed, as if echoing their momentum. Jordan laughed softly. "That was poetic." Renee smirked. "You think he got the message?" David replied, "I think he felt the silence louder than anything I said." They walked together down the street, side by side, not a team scrambling for scraps, but founders steering a rocket. The past no longer defined them. It only sharpened their aim. This wasn't a chapter. It was the plot twist. David glanced up at the skyline and whispered, "She would have loved this." Jordan nodded, knowing he meant his mother. Legacy wasn't a word anymore. It was walking proof, breathing and expanding in real time. Press coverage exploded overnight. Black-led startup flips the table on billionaire investor. David's inbox overflowed. podcasts, TV, invites, speaking gigs. But he chose silence. We didn't do this for applause, he told Jordan. Still, the story spread. Young founders of color messaged him daily. You made me believe I could, one wrote. Another said, I keep your quote on my wall. David realized the ripple was larger than Pulsar. It was cultural. His journey became a mirror for others to see themselves. He wasn't just breaking into a market. He was breaking a mold. Jordan said, You're becoming what we never had growing up. David looked at her and said, Then we build so they don't have to wait like we did. It wasn't fame he chased. It was impact. And now, impact had a platform. At an industry gala that weekend, David accepted an innovation award. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. But as he held the trophy, he didn't see the audience. He saw his mother's face. You built your own door, she had once said. He stepped up to the mic, paused, then said, This is for every kid who's been told they're not the right fit, for the rooms that couldn't see our value until we showed them. Silence. Then thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, but David's eyes glistened. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about becoming the light. That night, as he walked off stage, Jordan wrapped her arm around his. You ready for what's next? She asked. David smiled, lifting the award slightly. We've only just begun. And this time, the world was finally watching. Pulsar was now a force, closing international partnerships, automating global logistics for thousands of clients. One morning, David's assistant entered his office. There's someone here to see you. No appointment. David looked up. Who? She paused. Vincent Hale. David stood slowly, surprise flickering, then nodded. Send him in. Vincent walked in, older now, shoulders slightly hunched under his designer coat. I won't waste your time, Vincent said. I'd like to explore a serious equity partnership. David studied him in silence. You denied me in this very city, David replied. Laughed at my pitch. Vincent sighed. And now I regret that deeply. David crossed his arms. You didn't just miss an opportunity. You misjudged a man. Vincent said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was earned. The power dynamic had flipped completely. David gestured to a seat but remained standing. Let's talk. But you're not buying your way into my house. You'll follow my term. They sat across from each other. Vincent detailed his offer. Capital infusion, global expansion, exclusive rights in certain regions. David listened quietly. What you're offering, he said slowly, is access I built without you. Vincent nodded. And you did it better than most with 10 times the help. David tapped his fingers on the desk. Why now? Vincent exhaled. Because I finally understand your value. David replied, too late to recognize talent after it's televised. Vincent chuckled faintly, but David didn't smile. If I accept anything, he said, it won't be because I need you. It'll be because I want to control how you're allowed in. It wasn't ego. It was boundaries. The same man once dismissed now controlled the gate. And this gate was guarded by scars and spreadsheets. David brought the offer to his leadership team. Ow. Around the table sat Jordan, Renee, and Aisha. Now they're full-time product-led. I don't want this to be about pride, David said. But I won't erase history either. Jordan leaned in. You owe him nothing, but if it pushes our mission further, maybe it's worth it, on your terms. Renee nodded. Control the contract. Make it bulletproof. Aisha added. Let this be the lesson for every founder watching us. David looked around at his team. Each one had grown beside him. He realized this decision wasn't just his. It was collective. What they built wasn't just scalable, it was sovereign. Then we draft terms, he said. But we don't bend. We build forward. They weren't the underdogs anymore. They were the standard. 2 weeks later, the revised offer was sent, strict equity terms, community reinvestment clauses, and a mentorship pipeline for Black founders. Vincent's team pushed back. David replied, "We're not just doing business. We're correcting imbalance." Vincent eventually agreed. The papers were signed in a quiet moment. No press. No champagne. Just the sharp click of a pen that carried generational weight. David shook Vincent's hand, but this time his gaze didn't flinch. "This is no favor," David said. "This is your overdue buy-in on our foundation." Vincent nodded with unspoken humility. That handshake wasn't an alliance. It was history bending itself toward justice, documented, notarized, and irreversible. That night, David returned to his apartment. Same walls, same desk, but everything different. He placed the signed contract beside his mother's photo. "We did it," he whispered. No champagne. No broadcast. Just reflection. He looked out at the skyline, heart beating steady. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules, so no one had to start where he did. He opened his laptop and began drafting a plan for their new mentorship fund. A knock came. Jordan entered with takeout in hand. "No press tour?" she teased. David smiled. "Nah, just dinner and legacy." She set the food down and raised a brow. "You ready to go even bigger?" David turned to her, eyes full of fire. "Now we scale differently. This time we lift others with us." The world hadn't seen anything yet. Months passed and Pulsar outscaled faster than ever. With strategic backing and bulletproof contracts, they entered Europe and Asia. David, once scraping for Wi-Fi, was now keynoting global logistics summits. One morning in Paris, he stood backstage, watching a crowd of 3,000 fill the hall. Jordan adjusted his lapel mic. "Nervous?" she asked. David smiled. "No." Focused. The screen behind him displayed, from startup to standard, the Pulsar Out revolution. When his name was announced, the applause was thunderous. But David didn't hear noise. He heard his mother's voice, "Build your own door." On stage, he spoke with quiet conviction. Not about money. Not even about success. But about access. Equity. Correction. "You don't change systems from the inside," he said. "You change them by refusing to wait for permission." The crowd rose in ovation. "And David?" He bowed, not to be applauded, but to acknowledge the generations that pushed him to this moment. Back home, Pulsarout's mentorship fund launched. Applications poured in from Black, Indigenous, and Latinx founders across the country. David met each cohort personally. In one session, a young woman stood up, voice trembling. "Your story gave me permission," she said. David smiled softly and replied, "You never needed it." In the back, Renee wiped her eyes. The program didn't just fund startups, it built networks, provided legal aid, and opened pitch rooms previously closed. "It's not charity," David often said. "It's correction." As Pulsarout grew, so did the ecosystem around it. 1,000 new ventures emerged. A new generation was rising, not asking to be seen but building their own visibility. David never missed a session. Because every time he looked at those rooms he didn't see mentees. He saw reflections of himself, before the pitch, before the funding, before the noise. And he knew, this was the real legacy. David's personal life also began to shift. Late nights once filled with code were now spent in quiet dinners with Jordan. They'd built more than a company, they'd built trust. One night, walking home after a Pulsar gala, David turned to her. "You ever think we'd make it this far?" Jordan smiled. "I never thought we wouldn't." They walked in silence, hand in hand, beneath city lights. No boardroom. No cameras. Just peace. He realized that success wasn't loud anymore. It was soft. Quiet. Grounded. The kind you feel, not flaunt. "You know," Jordan said, nudging him, "you can actually take a vacation now." David laughed. "What's that?" She smirked. "We're going to find out." And in that moment, David understood, legacy isn't only built in systems. It's also built in stillness, in shared glances, in someone knowing you before the world ever did. As Pulsar approached unicorn status, media pressure intensified. Offers came to sell, to merge, to step down. But David declined them all. "This company isn't a product," he told his board. "It's a precedent." Investors who once doubted now fought for proximity. Tech blogs called him the reluctant kingmaker. But David never forgot the doors that stayed shut. So he built new ones. He created partnerships with HBCUs, sponsored engineering programs in underfunded schools. "You can't diversify tech," he said, "without rebuilding the staircase." His photo might have been on magazine covers, but he wasn't chasing legacy anymore. He was living it. His impact wasn't measured in downloads. It was measured in how many others now had a chance to start higher than he did. And that, to him, was worth more than every valuation. 1 year after Vincent's return, Pulsar officially crossed $1 billion in valuation. The news broke globally. David was in his childhood neighborhood when he got the call. He looked around. Same streets, same cracked sidewalks. But he wasn't the same man. Children played near the corner store where he once sold candy to fund his first laptop. "Mr. Carter," one of them shouted, recognizing him. David walked over, knelt down, and handed the kid his old mitt hoodie. "You'll need this," he said with a smile. As he stood up, he looked at the sky. "We made it, Ma." The world would see the valuation, the headlines, the empire. But David saw something else. Kid from a forgotten zip code who chose to build, who chose not to wait. And now, the world had to watch him rise. A year later, David returned to the same glass boardroom where it all began. The skyline hadn't changed, but he had. This time, he wasn't invited. He was hosting. Pulsar acquired a smaller competitor and moved into their flagship tower. As the team set up, David stood by the window, looking out at the city. Jordan walked in and said, "You okay?" David nodded. "Just remembering." The table was the same one where Vincent had once dismissed him. Now, it was where Pulsar would lead investor meetings, founder summits, and community programs. "History repeats," David said. "But this time, we're writing the next draft." Jordan placed her hand on his shoulder. "This place used to reject us. Now it runs on our decisions." He looked at the empty chairs and whispered, "Let them come. We'll receive them differently." The world hadn't turned upside down. David had just climbed high enough to see it clearly. Pulsar launched its first global conference, Founders Forward, in San Francisco, attracting innovators from over 40 countries. David opened the event, not with a keynote, but a chair circle. No stage. No hierarchy. Just stories. "Every founder here is a mirror," he said. "We're not here to pitch, we're here to build bridges." From the back of the room, Vincent watched silently, not as a speaker, but as a student. He wasn't celebrated. He was learning. And that, David believed, was the point. "The world doesn't need more gatekeepers," David told the room. "It needs more architects." The crowd leaned in, phones down, eyes up. The summit wasn't about who had the most funding. It was about who had the most courage to build, without permission. David stood not above them, but among them. The leader who rose, and then reached back. The news broke 2 days later. Pulsar IPO at $430 billion. Headlines called it a historic moment. But David wasn't watching the stock ticker. He was in a public school classroom in Newark, talking to 9th graders about resilience. "They'll tell you it's about luck," he said. "But it's really about never folding." One kid asked, "What kept you going when everyone said no?" David smiled. "I stopped listening." The teacher stood in the back, wiping tears. No investor or press tour could rival this. David knew billion-dollar valuations would come and go. But if these kids saw themselves in his story, that was real equity. "If you can build it," he said, "they can't deny it forever." And when he left the classroom, dozens of kids crowded him, not for autographs, but for advice. He gave them all the same answer. Start. The rest comes later. That evening, David walked the halls of Pulsar's new headquarters. It wasn't opulent, just purposeful. Each wing named after someone who shaped his journey. Marla Strategy Room, Jordan Operations Hall, Mom's Corner. In the center, a glass wall, etched with a quote, "Build what they said you couldn't." David stood there in silence. Aisha walked up behind him. "You know this isn't the end, right?" He turned. "No," he said. "It's the standard." The company wasn't just a solution anymore. It was a symbol. A blueprint. A door cracked open wide. David reached out and touched the glass. "This isn't about me," he whispered. It never was. Behind him, the office buzzed with energy. Young teams, new leaders, new missions. Pulsar was no longer a startup. It was a movement with bricks laid in sacrifice and mortar made of vision. The camera fades in on a quiet rooftop. David stands alone, city skyline glittering behind him. He holds the same prototype he once pitched and was rejected for, now encased in glass. He looks into the lens, calm. "They said no, and I built anyway." A pause. "This isn't just my story, it's yours too. Because every door they shut on you can become a foundation. Every no can be restructured into a watch me." The wind brushes his coat as he sets the prototype on a ledge overlooking the city. Legacy isn't just what you build, it's what you make impossible to ignore. He turns, walking slowly into the shadows. The final shot lingers on the skyline, glowing quietly. His voice echoes one last time. "Let them doubt. Just don't let them stop you." Fade to black.